So welcome to this, which I hope will be a very interesting discussion about now we've had elections on both sides of the Atlantic, in the US with Trump and here with Keir, and what does that mean for biotech? You know, we've been through a sort of a roller coaster ride over the last few years. It's been very difficult for most biotechs to raise money, especially in the seed and pre-seed. You know, and will this reinvigorate it? What does it mean for regulation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biosecure Act? So there's lots of implications that happen in the US, but we'll also be looking at the UK landscape and how governments can support and help our startups in the biotech space specifically. And we have a fantastic panel. I'm really pleased that they've agreed to come today. So thank you very much. I'll introduce myself briefly first. My name's Sunil. I'm the CEO of O2H Ventures and co-founder of O2H Discovery Group. We have a CRO business based in UK and India, doing drug discovery research services, around 800 people. But we also have a venture fund, which I lead, and we invest into biotech, therapeutic startups, pre-seed deals. We lead most of the stuff we do, and we go into pretty much the first rounds, and then try and hang on as much as we can. We have two funds, an SES fund and a knowledge intensive fund. And we have an incubator site in Cambridge where we help and support startups, and that's in central Cambridge, actually in a village just out central Cambridge called Hawkston. So that's a bit about me, and I've been in the industry for over 20 years doing this stuff. So Rosie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Rosie Barnett, clinician by background. The next part of my career is operator, building early stage businesses. I'm now an investment principal at Delin Ventures, which is a 100 million early stage life sciences fund, particularly with a focus on cell and gene therapy, and also particularly with a focus on company building as well. And my other hat is I'm currently chief operating officer for one of our portfolio companies, Swarm Oncology.
So Laura Lane, I head up Lilly Ventures here in Europe. So it's a corporate venture capital investor for Eli Lilly and Company. Which is obviously the largest big pharma company right now by market cap, for anyone who doesn't know that. So we have a number of different strategies that we pursue. We invest in funds that back life science companies. We do direct investments into syndicated rounds. And we also sort of help, especially in the European side, to sort of, I guess I call it kind of air traffic control, because it's always very difficult to find the person in a 40,000 person company, you know, to integrate with and to discuss, you know, kind of the great science that's coming out of Europe. And so we help a bit with that. We're also part of an early stage sort of BD and external innovation department called Catalyze 360, which is a sort of sister organization to kind of classic BD&L. And within that, we obviously have the ventures team, so that's providing capital to the biotech and life sciences industry, as well as our Lilly Gateway Labs team, who basically provide kind of curated space, an incubator and lab space, you know, globally. It started in the US, and now we also have LGL London coming to us in a sort of next year, which is very exciting. That's been announced. And then thirdly, as part of the Catalyze sort of offering, we have a team that basically does sort of R&D support and services, sort of tools, technologies and talent or capabilities to basically help biotechs kind of move their programs forward. So the whole idea there is we kind of co-create together. So it's a sort of like choose your own adventure. Like sometimes you need space, sometimes you need capital, sometimes you need capabilities. I mean, usually you always need cash, but sometimes the other things are, you know, can cover that as well. Anyway, great to be here.
Thanks, Laura. I mean, it's great to have pharma on the panel, and I think Lilly they've had the success with GLP-1s, obviously we know, and there was another success today you were telling me about just before. Do you want to just mention that?
Well, I haven't actually read the press release or the end points yet myself, but it looked like there was some good results in a sort of head-to-head study on some of the.
I think Lilly doing well is great for the sector, and they really are sort of giving back, whether it's through their incubators or through their fund of funds and collaborations. I mean, they're literally talking to all our portfolio. I'm sure everyone's portfolio, and seeing where they can come in, even very early with small checks, and it does help. And they seem to be having that impact in the sector, which we'd hope they have. Jonathan?
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin. I'm a general partner with Brandon Capital, which is a $1.5 billion fund headquartered in Australia. I run our European activities, which is about half of what we do, just biotech. We've got just closed the sixth fund, which is, well, it will be about 500 million Aussie dollars, so about 250 million pounds. And it's sort of seed, Series A, Series B, and up the alphabet. And yeah, mostly sort of asset focused companies, not so much on the platform side, but a mix of preclinical and clinical stage.
Hi, I'm Liz Klein. I'm from Calculus Capital, where I'm an investor director. Calculus is more of a generalist, semi-specialist EIS VCT fund. We invest in 3 verticals, one of which is life sciences. The other 2 are media content and B2B SaaS. The thing that connects them all is high growth scaling businesses. And we've been doing this for over 25 years. We were the first EIS fund in the UK. We've invested in things over the years such as Horizon Discovery, Sympronics, ScanCell, and we're actually co-invested on one company with Lilly. We do very few investments each year in life sciences, between about 1 and 3. That's less than 0.5% of things that we actually see. But we like to get very engaged and involved. And if we're not the right people to be helping you, we'll bring our network to bear to help you make a success of your business.
Great, thank you. So the topic is around, Trump and so what next. So, one of the things that Trump has said he's going to do, he's going to scrap the Inflation Reduction Act. That is what he sort of said in his campaigning. And this has been somewhat of a headwind to certain modalities, specifically small molecules, but also has a cap on some other modalities as well in cell and gene therapy space, etc. So I just wondered, if he does that, will it have an impact on, has it had an impact on what you invest into and how you look at a particular investment? If it's small molecule, would you be having to have a higher bar, for example? And if that's removed, will that change the way that you invest now, given what you know and how they've been selecting drugs for price control? So I'm going to go to Laura first, because being sort of with the pharma background, she might be
Okay,
able to
so,
give some insights to how you value these projects.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like it's been something we've been talking about a lot this year, and I have to say, like, I should probably know more about it than I do. I think it's obviously kind of impacted like the wider organization, and these are sort of when people are making kind of strategic decisions and like thinking about pipeline. It's obviously like it's a factor you take into consideration. On the Lilly Venture side, I mean, we really look at writing that first check into like a syndicated round. So there may have been like a founding investor and a founding investment, and then we kind of get involved maybe at that seed or that first sort of institutional round. I don't think it's actually from just a pure Lilly Ventures perspective. I really don't think it's made any difference to how we think about things, because what we're trying to do is invest in things that are truly tip of the spear. So this is something that might come to bear in like 5 to 10 to 15 years. This is not something that's going to be like ripe for the Lilly pipeline, January 25. We're trying to think about like really what's next. We're not thinking about like, what's the next generation of, diabetes drug, because like there's other folks in the company that have really got that covered. We're trying to think, well, is there a new modality that can play in delivery, or is there like some transformative area in, cell therapy that, means that we think differently about how we're going to treat neurodegeneration, which, obviously we've been as a company, very engaged in the neurodegeneration space, but we're not in every modality. We're in most modalities, but we're not in cell therapy yet. So, it's one of those things where we're looking at, because we're really looking at that true tip of the spear. It means that, if you do have something that breakthroughs on a small molecule perspective, and I saw something actually from a Oxford spin out the other day that has a, just has its like first in vivo large animal data. It's a small molecule, and it's a kind of complex small molecule, but if it clears out, the problem that it can from an oncology perspective, and it like completely changes and transforms like the disease sort of pathology, then that's huge. So I think I'm just excited by kind of new science, things that, like will change outcomes. And at the end, and that's what our role to do is. Like, yes, we have to sort of be a bit mindful of, what our colleagues in other departments will kind of judge it by in maybe 5 or 6 years' time, but actually backing truly new stuff. I think if you worry too much about what's going to happen in 10 years' time, you might not, because it will be different anyway.
Yeah. So Jonathan, Brandon do a lot of small molecules, but a lot of other things as well. Has it changed the way that you are now going to invest from your new fund, or did you pay any attention to it in your last fund?
Yeah, it's made a big difference. We do much less on the small molecule side now, much more on the antibody, oligos, other things. I think that, I mean, who knows what Trump will do, but scrapping the Inflation Reduction Act would have a hugely positive influence because when you talk to most folks, bankers, pharma, they say that the NPV of their sort of small molecule prediction of small molecule sales is like 40% lower than it would have otherwise been, which means that the value that's placed on our companies at exit is lower. And the main thing I think that will make a difference is that hopefully the M&A landscape will open up for earlier stage companies. The big thing that has really been a massive problem for smaller VCs, and it's why a lot of smaller VCs have not got fresh funds at the moment. I mean, I think we're one of the few sort of mid-sized firms that has raised a decent fund this year. The huge funds have been raised, but the smaller funds, a lot of folks have struggled because they haven't had the exits, and the LPs, they really care about cash on cash performance, and that hasn't been good for a lot of firms. And that has been because pharma have been buying assets late because they've had LOE problems. So, hopefully in the next cycle, kind of from, maybe next year or the year after onwards, there will be more M&A at the certainly phase one, but also preclinical stages, because that is the bread and butter for small and mid-size early stage investors. Because if you're going to go into a company early, you got to be able to exit early. You can't wait till phase three, or your business model is not going to work.
Thanks for that. And so, Rosie, you're obviously not in small molecules, and we'll come on to M&A, by the way, and exits, etc. That's one of my key topics. So we're going to delve down deeper into that. But in terms of modality, Dylan did some stuff in small molecules in the earlier days,
Yep.
and then decided maybe a few years back to specialize in cell and gene therapy space. Do you think it's partly driven by pricing policies in the US?
I think it's always top of mind to look at not just the US, because we have also UK and EU focus, so we're quite global in nature. I mean, of course, you have to be monitoring these things, but sort of similar to what Laura said, when we're thinking about advanced therapies, there's so many challenges with getting these patients the drugs they need and these therapies to market and approved anyway. I mean, there's so few of them actually out there and generating good outcomes for patients on the market post approval today. So our kind of thinking is around, yes, it's very. I personally, I don't necessarily think that the analysts are indicating that the act would be scrapped altogether. I think we're probably seeing what's likely to happen, although like Jonathan said, who knows what Trump will do. Probably not a huge progression of the act, but I would say it's sort of unlikely that it's going to be scrapped altogether. And so when we're thinking about building a company in the advanced therapy space or investing in a company early stage in the advanced therapy space, we do have to be very mindful of the political landscape, but also we tend to think about things more from the problem set of what we can actually control. So where we may not have much political influence globally, but we can think about, okay, what are the companies and technologies addressing, for example, the manufacturing challenges, and thinking about the cost of goods that way, which means that some of our portfolio companies are focusing on that space, and hopefully they can have an impact through their technologies from the bottom of the value chain. And I won't talk about M&A because you said you want to come on to it later. But so yeah, I think we have to take a pragmatic view. We can't control what's going to happen in the political landscape. We have to be very mindful of it. But when focusing on innovations, our companies are also focused on the UK and other markets as well. So I think we're just as mindful as developments in those markets too. Bearing in mind that, of course, the US is always going to be the major market for, access once the therapies are approved. But our sort of companies are quite a bit earlier stage. So I think we, like Laura said, have to focus on, the here and now, and how do we remove the barriers and improve access in the shorter term as well.
Thanks. So Liz, your funds are more of a generalist fund. Calculus, it invests in different areas as within biotech, quite a broad range, I would have thought, and maybe less therapeutics than most, but you are interested. Do you think this is going to impact the way that you invest at all in this particular space?
Well,
because I've seen you looking more at therapeutics than I ever have done calculus in my history. Therefore, do you think it's more interesting now?
well, it's
sector. We need
It's
more.
multiple.
We need more new money in the sector. So.
Yeah. So interestingly, just to talk about the money piece, as an EIS VCT fund, we raise money each year and we basically invest it the following year. And we don't have an end point in our funds. So we can hold things and have held things for a decade or more, although we're not hugely comfortable with that. We'd like things to go out a little earlier, partly because of our investors in our business are, high net worths, end of career, looking for somewhere to put some money. It's not going to be now, obviously not in pensions anymore, but some other places that have some tax efficiency. And so for them, they have, and for us, we have a slightly different point of view. We're looking for highly innovative technologies, and we've always invested in highly innovative technologies, and often in platform type plays, because that gives us the best opportunity to effectively de-risk our business. We are not in the position to have that depth of understanding in binary single asset businesses. So we will not actually invest in a binary asset business. And we also invest relatively early because, again, as an EIS investor, we can only invest in knowledge intensive businesses who've raised less than £20 million under the schemes. And because we don't want to be the only investor nor the only EIS VCT investor, we ultimately have to share that. So we have to invest in their first or second round of raising EIS. So we do invest relatively early. We like to invest alongside people who have a depth of knowledge. But ultimately, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, it will make some decision. It will help drive some thought processes within the management teams of the companies we invest in. But it will do so in part of a greater global understanding of where these things are going. Not a single company we're investing in, and we've got one or two that are in phase one, but everything else is preclinical. So we're looking 15 years down the line to ultimately where we want to be. And really, we still need the oncology drugs. We still need new paradigms of treatment. So for our investments, it's not the top of the agenda. Top of the agenda is access to capital. And that comes back to Jonathan's point, which is until you can start getting those exits higher up the chain, where the IRA might have more impact, you're not going to get that access to that next stage of capital for our investing companies.
That's very good points. Yeah, if Trump does scrap the IRA, I think it would be great for the sector. But then as long as he doesn't then say, well, actually, we pay more for our medicines in the US than everybody else, I've got this more draconian, thing that's going to, because I think we sort of live, we need when we do our models, I think when pharma does their models for M&A, they need to have a higher IR than they did have before. That's what the pharma guys were telling me. And that's impacted the way that we invest. We're looking for things which maybe have a bigger market. But at the same time, you need to think faster clinic. Because at the same time as having a big market, you need to get things that can get to clinic quite quickly, especially as an early stage fund. So it's quite an interesting challenge.
I mean, that timing piece is actually really important. I wish I could remember the stats. I really should. It's in my amend. I can't remember the numbers. But we've worked, I mean, at Lilly internally, what we did, we specifically worked on bringing down the time from, like development candidate to like clinical POC. And I think it used to be around like 8 years or something. And now we brought it down to about 5 or something. But like that makes a massive difference. And don't quote me on the numbers because I literally can't remember. But like it's a substantial drop. And so that, and we did that way before the IRA was a thing.
Yeah.
But it was deliberately done because actually that timepiece, whether there's IRA or not on the small molecule front, it is actually huge.
Yeah.
So that's made it's a really important piece. So actually efficiency and doing the right studies as quickly as possible and executing like in a sort of 5-star fashion, I think remains even more important.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think the interesting thing about the IRA and your point, about will Trump bring in something more draconian? Well, ultimately, the US can't afford, neither can the UK, increasingly high prices for inefficient drugs or drugs that aren't delivering their on the ultimate promise. So I think what we're seeing is companies talking much more about activity, about getting quick to the answer quicker. And so we're seeing a lot of those companies as well that are going to help the biotechs get that technology to be able to drive down time to a proof of concept, drive down that. So actually that's an interesting investment thesis that we are currently grappling with.
Yeah, I mean, we need to become more efficient in the way we discover and develop drugs, whether small molecule, cell and gene, or anything else. It takes far too long. It's far too expensive. Obviously, we're hoping that AI and machine learning, quantum could be the answer to that, but there are other ways of doing things more quickly as well. And we're all trying to sort of find those ways and invest in those areas because it's going to have a huge impact. Coming back to sort of the second theme, which is like since Trump has been president-elect, the stock markets in the US are sort of going berserk. And even I'm getting on that train. I sold some of my UK stocks and bought some US because, that's where the money's going. And, if he really does deliver on some of the things he's going to say, I think could be a bubble. It's going to be very interesting. And, when I'm looking at the biotech index, it's the SBI, it's moved in the opposite direction to the Nasdaq almost. It's like the Nasdaq's went up and the SBI has kind of gradually hinted up a bit, but hasn't really sort of got that same trajectory. So we'll come on to the M&A sort of straight afterwards. But do we feel that Trump's policy or his aura is going to have an impact on the IPOs in the biotech sector? Because that's what we really need to see improve. I think there's some green shoots, and we've seen that, but the window has been firmly closed for 2 years. It's never closed for much longer. I've got data to show it doesn't close for 2 years ever. But so are we seeing green shoots on the IPO market, which would then hopefully drive more money into the sector and more M&As, which we'll discuss. Anyone wants to take that? Maybe Jonathan first.
I don't think the IPO window's closed. There have been some decent IPOs, but they're companies that are in phase 2 or post phase 2 that have like quite obvious products that are quite de-risked, that are often not first in class, with seasoned teams. So I think the IPO window's open for the sort of no-brainer type deal. It's definitely closed for anything that's not in that category. But there are also...
Who would you say it's closed for? Which companies should not be IPOing that maybe have IPO'd in 2021?
Well, anyone that doesn't have sort of clinical proof of concept, is not working on, obesity, and, has a management team that's not highly credible and not based in the US. But I think...
It's still pretty tough out there, right?
The window's getting narrow, so you've got to be a diabetes company with a super hot management team and based in Boston.
A little bit, yeah. But I think that there are something like 150 companies that have filed to go public. So there is an enormous queue. Obviously, not all of those are going to price IPOs next year, but I think the IPO window will open, but it's probably already kind of full, I would guess.
I mean, the other thing, just to reference what you said earlier as well, is that we've, the larger funds that have raised from a sort of venture capital perspective. Now, I'm not sure if it's true venture or whether it's a bit like venture P. It's a little bit later stage. So given that those bigger funds, the sort of $500 billion funds, the growth funds, as we would call them, like they have been a bit more successful at raising money. So in a sense, you don't need to do that IPO to get that chunk of cash that people are getting in, the sort of COVID years. Like you've got like those alternatives, but you still need to be mature enough to then take that private money on board. I think it's a very different, if you're in that sort of early clinical phase, you've got those folks as an option. But if you're preclinical and you're just, validating your mechanisms and your targets and your approach or your platform, then, you're still in very much the classic life science venture world. And that's where it is more tricky because those funds have been harder to raise. And also, it's been a bit more of a dry spell on the early M&A.
I'm going to bring it a bit more from the IPO into sort of the M&A world. I have some data to show that actually M&A is actually, we're doing okay. In 2023, we were much higher. We're 32 M&As in our sector, 21 the year before, 17, 25 in 2020. So we're up there. And I think there's, some of these companies on the Nasdaq are trading below cash. So I can see why it does make there will be some movement there. But bringing it back to what we do day to day in our portfolio management, investment day jobs, um, what is it that you try to do to encourage your companies to create an exit? How do you engineer that? And are you seeing more activity within the portfolio that you actively manage? So we'll start with Liz.
So pretty much every board meeting or every other board meeting, we talk about exits or M&A or something similar. Because I invest relatively early, often M&A is the exit. There's often
Because the IPO window is firmly
because
closed,
the IPO window is
unless you're in
firmly closed.
Boston and
Especially in the UK, we have one portfolio company that is Nasdaq based, but everything else that's listed is listed in the UK, and things are delisting in the UK because of access to capital. And I spent about 15 years of my life dealing with companies on AIM, and believe me, I've never seen it as bad as this with AIM, and it would be there's no liquidity and no access to capital. So in the smaller companies, we spend a lot of time talking about how does our strategy fit with where we ultimately want to be. What do we see the vision for this business is going to be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? Because none of these companies, very few of the companies in our portfolio are actually ever going to make money. They are going to exit before that
So
point.
how do you engineer that? What is it you do to try and engineer it from the moment you invest? You're saying where is it, and then trying to work backwards, or do you actually do that level of planning? Or
we do that in conjunction with working out what the product could be. What can it be? What can the technology deliver? And what does that mean with regards to the ultimate exit or the M&A? Who is the obvious player? If you're a biotech with an oncology asset, where can that oncology asset end up? You want to partner it or in some form. If you're a tools business, and we've got some really interesting tools, what does that mean, and who should you be speaking to now, and how can the board, which I think is the most critical thing that you will recruit within your venture, is how does that board bring that experience to you? And you definitely want somebody on a board who's done it before, because they can bring that wealth of experience. We really want these companies ultimately to exit we want to exit these companies in 5 to 7 years. We may not be the ultimate exit, but it's where we would like to get out. So finding that M&A point and working out where it is, and then working backwards alongside working out what the technology can do, is where we want to be.
so, Rosie, when you're investing, how do you think about the exit?
So I think just one comment on the IPO piece, because I think for the investors and returning the capital, it's a major financing event. Is when you realise your value. But I think because we focus a lot on company building as well, so we do think about things from the mindset of building the business and where does the clinical development go longer term, and especially when you think about advanced therapies, that's still a relatively untrodden path for some of the therapeutics that our companies are developing. So it's very important that we think about is the IPO the right way to go? Or like you said, is a strategic M&A potentially a better option for these companies, which at that point may not be revenue generating and may still have clinical development milestones to achieve, depending on the type of business. In terms of how we think about preparing companies and supporting them, because we do also have some tools companies, so that does look a bit different. But yeah, it's all about what's the maturity of the board and the management team. What experience have they had to bring to bear in previous businesses, if they have had successful exits? If not, or even if they have, what can we do to help facilitate some of those later stage relationships that needs to be built around the bankers, the right bankers to speak to, both here and in the US, to help inform the management team. Are they thinking about the right criteria? Because once you exit onto the public market, you're under so much more scrutiny, and that's very, very challenging for a biotech company, especially in advanced therapies. So making sure that they have the right information from the right sources, because there's so much noise and confliction around, to help prepare them to do that, so that once they are ready, they're set up for success.
Yeah, interesting.
I think preparing for exit has become more complicated as a smaller investor, because if you've got like a 200 to 300 million fund like ours, which used to be like the sweet spot fund size, you got enough firepower to get sort of first clinical POC without a massive dilution. So you can own a good percentage of the company and return a decent part of your fund on one exit on the upfront alone. And that was always the calculus. I think because M&A has shifted later, bigger and later, which has been great for growth fund investors, has been tricky for smaller investors because you've had to gear your company up to have the right team and the right syndicate to be able to go from raising, say, a £20 million Series A to then 100, and the sort of dilution that goes along with it. And it's been okay for us because we can invest cross-fund, which means we don't get tapped out. But what you see is that a lot of the early investors that have taken all the risk can't keep investing in the later rounds, and they just get diluted, and there's no reward for taking any of the early rounds. Exactly. So I think there's this real problematic dilemma. And what we've done with some of our Australian companies, which are never going to be able to bring in the sort of talent that you need to raise 100 million, is we've ended up merging them with established US companies in a sort of paper merger, and then kind of become a more passive investor in the bigger company. Because the alternative is that the truth is that there aren't enough good teams to support, enough £100 million kind of fundraisers. And we've just been pragmatic about it. And I think the truth is that a lot of the companies in the UK, early stage companies, should think more about that than trying to go the whole distance on their own.
Yeah. Just bridge to Laura a little bit, because I'm pretty interested, because obviously Lily invests and they can buy. Do you only invest where you can buy?
No, because what we're trying to do is, so the TAs, our therapeutic areas, they have a sort of, strategic plan of what they want to, expand the franchises and, the areas that we.
TAs are what, sorry? The
therapeutic areas. So the difference, so you have like neuroscience or immunology or oncology or diabetes and obesity and complications. So those are the sort of the therapeutic areas, and they are obviously developing, new drugs and new platforms, but also they also then, 50% of our pipeline comes from, actually 60% in the last 10 years, but those have come in through via partnerships. So the partnership piece and externally developed assets is hugely important.
But you want to own the asset. I mean, you
Yeah.
invest, but there comes a point in
Yeah,
time
so
that
we're a
we
strategic.
don't want to pay those milestones anymore.
So we're a strategic corporate venture capital, which means that we want to do stuff that is, sort of like within our broad areas of interest, but they're not exactly on strategy now. So the way I kind of describe it is like, if strategy is like a circle, you have this sort of like wobbly fringe at the edge. We want to be in the kind of wobbly fringe where it would kind of make the therapeutic area leads a bit uncomfortable, like it's not kind of quite in their sweet spot. And basically to push that boundary, to make that sort of firm circle of what's on strategy now, like make the circle bigger. So you'll see on, like, we have a website with the things we're interested in, but if you look at like Lilly Scientific Partnering, like for therapeutic areas, like it's actually a very long list for each of those different areas of the things that we're interested in. It's not just like within neurodegeneration, it's not just like Alzheimer's disease, it's Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS and Huntington's, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's always a very broad church. So what we're trying to do in ventures is try and find things that are really quite different. And yes, we get kind of interest and buy-in, but these are not things that the therapeutic area is going to be like, oh, great, in 6 months' time, that's perfect for the portfolio, because it won't even have a development candidate yet. But if the mechanisms and the thesis kind of plays out, then when you get to those sort of classic milestones where pharma typically sees that as a sort of, an inflection point, whether it's GLP tox or whether it's phase 1 or proof of concept in phase 2, those are the sort of classic milestones. And so we're there to kind of not only sort of, it's not about so much about bridging a gap, it's more about trying to also get us into areas we weren't interested in because of exposure and sort of nudging people to that. So a good example is actually gene therapy. Like Lilly wasn't in gene therapy. We are obviously in gene therapy pretty substantially now with having bought Prevail. And it's like something we talk about, we work on, and we have internal teams, and we do a lot of work in that space. But actually that was something that was driven a bit from the ventures team way pre my time, where it was kind of nudging, being like, have you seen this? Have you seen these new technologies, these new modalities? And then it's something that becomes like your bread and butter. So I think we talk about this like core to fringe rotation. And so at the moment we try and work on the fringe and bring that into the core. But on the company side, on the biotech side, the thing that I think is most important when you're doing something new and really innovative, like you have to do that. It is BD, but it's socialization before you're trying to sell. It's education and socialization to basically teach people about what is this new mechanism, what is this new modality, like how it might fit in the future. Because obviously, people making the judgments are all scientists. What do scientists like to do? They like to have knowledge, like to have understanding. And if you have knowledge and understanding, that then drives interest. You know something more about something, you're interested, you want to learn more.
So in summary, like Lilly obviously have some big successes in the metabolic space, and they have been traditionally in a small number of therapeutic areas, and now you're using your cash mountain to try to understand new areas, acquire, and fill in those gaps.
But I would also say the ventures piece is a very small.
But strategically, you do that, so
Yeah.
you're able to do that now.
Financially, it's a pretty small piece of the overall Lilly dollar spent.
I
But
think
it's like
long may it continue.
But it's something that we we're still trying to do it pretty substantial.
Just to take it a little bit macro in terms of more about so the tech versus biotech piece, just for a second, just to bring in Liz here a little bit, because I think she could contribute to this piece. Is there was a recent publication by the British Business Bank, not to put words in your mouth, but the life sciences funds that they had invested into created faster and bigger exits and better returns than the tech and green tech, I think it was. Deep tech and green tech was nowhere.
And they were also not benchmarked against the US, so it's like, so I mean, I agree. That was the question I should have asked in that other roundtable we're in. But I mean, because you invest across the board, and do you see your life science? Because I've seen you doing more life sciences than earlier. Is it because you feel that you can get a better return now, or do you think the opportunities are more because there's too much money in tech, or what is it?
Because the life sciences opportunities offer outsized returns. We recognise that probably a quarter to a third of our portfolio will fail. But if you can get what you can do in life sciences that you can't do in tech is potentially get a 10x return. If one of the companies I invest in now has the next GLP-1, for want of a better example, and then in 10 years' time when we're exiting and it's sold for, I get sold in such a way that I get a 10x return on my investment, that's a great success for me. In tech and deep tech, it's much more difficult to do that. And also we see lots of companies, more so than in life sciences, that are all doing the same thing, to be frank, which is why I only do life sciences. It's much more interesting. We do see things that might be targeting similar that will definitely be targeting similar indications, maybe with the same or similar modalities. But often they come to it with a unique approach because of the unique IP required. So there's an ability to get that mentally, get that outside return, and actually get that outside return.
So I'm going to bridge into a little bit stage of investing here, because we've seen ideas or assets which are either near the clinic or in the clinic having outsized returns in terms of, either on the Nasdaq, they're the ones that have stabilized and haven't gone down by 60%. But anything preclinical has been hammered. Now, that may create opportunities for investors to go in and invest early. However, the more established funds are looking at things that are either in the clinic or near the clinic. And I've overheard Jonathan that 5 years, he probably remember, at a conference telling me exactly this. And I was like, okay, because we do preclinical. I was like, oh, well, it's not always like that. And it's sort of come around. So Jonathan, do you basically look at things which are in the clinic now or close to the clinic? Is that your kind of benchmark to invest?
Yeah. This is like the perfect time to invest in clinical stage deals because they're really good value at the moment, especially in Europe or outside the US, Australia, for instance. I mean, we've got companies with phase 2 data that have post monies of about 25 million. And the truth is that it's clinical data that drives value with pharma, with everyone. And the problem with early stage life science VC, which is what I do, but the challenge with it is you don't actually get paid for it. You don't get rewarded for the risk. So in tech you do, because you get these sequential up rounds every time a company raises money. So the tech funds have had great paper returns, TVPI. They haven't had the DPI, which is the problem. The life science funds, it's the inverse. So we can't show our LPs that our portfolio is having progress on valuation until there's an exit, and then it goes from flat to, you know, big win. But that means that going in early and taking all the risk is not rewarded, because, you know, half your companies will fail, and the ones that don't fail, you'll get, you know, the big VCs will come in and they might give you a 10% up round or whatever, but it doesn't reward the amount of risk that you've taken. And the truth is that as an early stage investor, you don't do early stage investing because it's financially makes sense in this market. You do it because that's your place in the ecosystem. And so, you know, as a smaller fund, you can't get into the really competitive late stage deals because, you know, the $1 billion funds are already there.
That's great points, well made. So, I mean, Rosie, you do follow on most of your investments. In fact, you sort of lead, incubate, and follow on all the way through. So, I mean, you need quite deep pockets to do that, which I think, you know, and be quite narrow in your focus, which I think you are. So, I mean, how do you see the exit landscape for your portfolio, and are you able to follow on in everything in your space, given how much capital is actually required in cell and gene therapy space? Are you always looking to syndicate?
Well, even when we follow on, of course, we syndicate. So it's not, you know, it's not that we can, even with the company builds, it's always top of mind when we're thinking about, you know, where are gaps in the market that we feel we could get a team to address, or, you know, where's some really interesting data that we think we could build a company around. Yeah, it's.
Do you lead all the way then? Do you lead the first round?
No,
and
we
then
would
follow,
we would
follow, follow?
typically lead them follow. Yeah. We just don't have. I mean, to the point about deep pockets, we're £100 million fund, so we definitely don't have the cash to go all the way. But what I would say is we do really try. I mean, I know every VC, particularly in a more niche area, pays lip service to this, but we do really try to provide a lot of sort of team and strategic value to the companies. So we're really looking always to be super efficient and scrappy. Like the company I'm COO of, you know, we've put in a very limited amount of capital, and that company should be going into the clinic at the end of next year with its first lead candidate cell therapy. We've tried to look at, because particularly in advanced therapies, there are so many stories of companies that have had hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment have never really generated any returns or value for patients. When you think about the average amount of, you know, capital raised by cell therapy businesses to get to through phase 1 is about $260 million, and obviously we're never going to be able to put, you know, the majority of that in. So it's very challenging.
And regulation, I mean, one of the, like, coming back to the Trump thing, is very much about we're going to deregulate everything, and maybe some of his picks may do some of that in terms of, you know, we talk about that as we won't have time, but, you know, if they deregulate somewhat the market, do you think it will help the cell and gene therapy space, which I think is.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly it would. I mean, one of his policies around the right to try. I mean, let's see if he sort of brings that back into the equation, because that would improve the access via sort of slightly more unconventional routes. I think one of the real challenges is when you take a purely policy-driven approach and economic approach to thinking about regulating and developing medicines, it really, for me, like, the concern I have is it needs to always be founded in the science and driven by, you know, what is safe. At the end of the day, he's made some quite alarming statements about, you know, the FDA and what might be happening there. And Elizabeth, we were talking about this when we were preparing for the panel around what does this mean for our companies who are sort of approaching the clinic and trying to get decisions from bodies like the FDA. I mean, I think ultimately
The FDA pick was actually quite a sensible thing.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. That's probably a bad example.
He's actually a British guy. He's from Liverpool. Yeah.
I was looking him up. He thinks food is a big way to go, likes natural immunity.
Yeah.
And not very convinced about vaccines. And then they've got somebody who's a Surgeon General who thinks vaccines are the way to go. Vaccines are the way to go, but really has her own vitamin supplement line and is a Fox News commentator. Yep. And then the person who's in the CDC is a Republican who wants to ban any work on human embryos and protect abortions. And then you've got Trump, who liked vaccines at the beginning but didn't like the face mask, and then RFK, who
we all
Yeah.
know. No comment.
So it's a bit schizophrenic.
But the guy that lifted the markets is a guy called Martin
Yes.
Macquarie, who was the surgeon from
I didn't
Liverpool.
know he's from Liverpool.
Yeah, he's from Liverpool, and he was the FDA pick, and he will report to Robert
Yeah.
RFK,
Yeah.
who no comment.
Yeah.
So, but this Martin guy's actually quite a sensible chappy
Yeah.
by the looks of it. He's a bit of a vaccine skeptic, but apart from that,
Well, I agree with you. I mean, from what I thought was interesting about this is it feels quite schizophrenic, but with your point around, the right to try, you still need to be able to validate that something's safe,
Yeah.
that something
Yeah.
works, and if it isn't going to be the FDA, which I think it will still be the FDA, because don't forget, unless Trump gets 75% of the House, he can't go for more than 4 years, and he's also 81 now. So, for 4 years we might have disruption, but ultimately we still need to have a functioning, safe, and efficacious story.
I do think there's some, looking at Australia and how they, a lot of our companies go to Australia to do their phase 1 trial, not only because of the R&D tax credits, but you need an ethics committee approval and off you go. So there's a lot less regulation in actually starting clinical trial. I mean, so over to Brandon on this one. I mean, do you see that as an advantage for your portfolio that are in Australia, that they're able to conduct these trials quite efficiently and quickly get clinical data, which you said?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a massive advantage, and they have a 44% R&D tax credit as well. I mean, I think the Australians have realised that they're a long way away from anything. They got very good healthcare. They need to do things to incentivise. I think we've got the opposite problem. The MHRA is incredibly unattractive for companies that want to do clinical trials, and the R&D tax credits got less and less useful for biotechs. So those are two things that they could actually become, more like Australia, would help the industry a lot.
Just a question for the panel, really. What do we think we could bring into the UK which will help us take a more proactive approach to developing medicines?
I mean, I'm very happy to comment on that. So,
and by the way, in the audience, feel free to comment, put your hand up.
But don't worry, because the Regulatory Innovation Office will solve all of these problems, which has already been established. Sorry.
I mean, I do think that so you probably would have seen with the investment summit that the Prime Minister ran, was it October time? So Lilly made a big announcement to do various investments into the UK, working in the Manchester region on sort of outcome studies, but also a whole host of different things, in lots of different areas, including this Gateway Labs project as well. And I think so the UK has been a challenge to kind of bring larger scale investments here, and that was all driven by the commercial environment, that the pricing and access issue that kind of basically was, really, a dark cloud that kind of hung over everyone. Because if, on one hand, the UK is very good at innovation, but we're not very good at buying innovation. And there's a lot of things that are all kind of related. But if you're not going to be buying innovation and you're not able to, we used to have very speedy clinical trials. We no longer have speedy clinical trials, although it is getting better again. But you kind of drop down the kind of rankings, and so it's easy to go to Spain or to Poland. And the issue is, if you're not doing clinical trials here and you're also not buying medicines, then your patients aren't on standard of care. So it's this like self-fulfilling prophecy where you then keep like falling down the rankings. Now, we are a relatively small country, which is only ever going to globally contribute to drug revenues of 1 or 2 or 3%. It's a small number, but we're also a country, I think, where we can have the quality of the healthcare, and we can have great clinical trials, and we can have other things that kind of pull people in. We pull people in by the innovation that we have, but we also can't be kind of mediocre on the other things. Like, if we actually had if we can integrate everything, and we can have great clinical trials, and we can have a speedy regulator on top of the innovation, then people will launch drugs here, because it's a kind of natural, we're not a difficult market to deal with. At the moment, we've been a bit difficult. So I think things seem to be trending in the right direction. I think there seems to be a step change to kind of integrate all these things and try and think about how do we pull away some of the barriers. But I do also slightly wish that we hadn't had sort of the last 10 years where everything got a little bit worse and get back to square one. But I mean, I feel like things are moving in the right direction, and like people are doing the things that we kind of need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like when a farmer looks to launch a new medicine, Britain's sort of bottom of the pile now, and they may not even bother, which is quite scary.
Yeah.
Because they go through NICE and they get rejected, and then so we're not getting the best medicines in the UK anymore, which is crazy.
But if you're able to have like the best place to do your clinical trials, you will end up doing it because it's sort of low hassle to do it, and the doctors know it.
But
And
like you said, there's like an 18-month waiting list.
Yeah.
To like get a review done with the
yeah,
NHS.
so it's just a bit.
Rather go to Australia and get an ethics committee approval and off you run. So I think that's the problem that we have. But I think these things will get sorted out. Like you said, on the clinical trials waiting list is, I think, improving. They do know it is an issue, but we need to basically deregulate and be better. I think that's the bottom line.
I mean, I think the deregulation words, I'm not sure I'm totally comfortable with that one. I mean, I think we are a regulated industry, and I think most people are pretty happy with that.
Why can't we just say, look, the hospitals say all the
Because
nurses and
people
run
die.
It's a really good idea. Let's do this.
But people die if you're completely deregulated. There's got to be a happy.
But it's like
there-
you're
there's got to be a
handing
happy
off the other
medium.
people who should be able to take a clinical
Yeah.
decision. I mean, it should be, yeah.
But there's got to be a happy medium between being deregulated and being overly regulated. I think we went too far to the overregulated piece. I mean, actually, there's lots to criticise about what happened during COVID, but the one good thing was that we had multiple centres of excellence looking at the best treatment, and they very quickly came out with interesting treatments
Good point.
for COVID, which I would argue no other
No, we
healthcare
really-
system globally could have done in the
We shone a
speed.
great big torch in the UK then, and it was a very
And we
positive.
let it go by not then taking that learning and driving it forward. And then on top of that, I'd become a bit more Australian actually around things like R&D tax credits only going into life sciences. So you'd stop most of the defrauding, which is what the government's concerned about, and you'd say this is a life science focused credit, because life sciences is one of our most important industries.
And you
in
needed
this
that early
country.
stage. We just said,
And we
Jonathan
need-
just said how difficult it is at that early stage, and you need these intervention
Yeah.
support mechanisms, whether it's R&D tax credits,
Yeah.
Innovate UK,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, you invest slightly earlier than us. We're probably the next one after
Yeah.
you guys, and well before Brandon.
So we
But
do all the
it's
hard
really
work, and Brandon come in, hoover
Yeah,
up,
Brandon come and hoover it all up.
make the money.
But actually, R&D tax credits have an outsized importance for companies we invest in, and if they take that away, we might as well not do biotech in the UK.
Yep.
Sorry.
Look, I think it's been an interesting discussion. I'm going to call it there, but thank you very much for your attendance today. Thank you to the panel. Really, so I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I discussed all the things I wanted to talk about. So I appreciate all your time and coming on the pre-call as well to discuss. Thanks very much.